Darkfire, Book 2 of the Underviolet Sun series, Chapter 1, Poise and Frustration. The warrior stood poised on the balls of her feet, senses alert for the slightest hint of movement. Eyes closed, her face serene, beads of sweat trickling down the small of her back. She extended empathic tendrils to supplement her hearing, waiting for the spike of energy that would signal an attack. She tuned out the focused energy of the observers. They weren't important right now. The warrior dragged her liri across the floor, tracing a wide circle around her, the worn wood of the grip comfortable and familiar in her hand, the tip scraping gently over the mats on the floor. Her other hand flexed up behind her as she sank to a ready crouch. There, hearing the movement on her left, the barest swish of sound, she angled her head to the right fractionally in misdirection, a flare of satisfaction as her opponent took the bait, rushing to attack on the left. She gracefully dodged to the right, her muscles warm and fluid, and swung her liri around in a tight motion, the thin wood singing in the air to deliver a stinging slash to her opponent. She reversed her swing, bringing the liri back in an X formation to deliver a second and third stinging thwack across his upper chest. "3 marks! Out!" called a voice from the sideline, and her opponent cursed. She felt his flash of anger, followed by incredulity. She grinned in triumph and opened her eyes to look up at her opponent, frowning down at her. He was huge and bare-chested, wearing only loose workout pants. The male was gorgeous, and she admired him objectively, as one would admire a work of art. He had short, cropped bronze hair, his gilt skin shimmering with sweat, and was currently sporting 3 angry red stripes, 2 on his chest and another on his upper shoulder. His energy was distinctly feline and feral, contained by a ruthless will. Not for the first time she wondered how he had convinced a smart, gentle female like his healer mate to join with him. The female had a spine of titanium and balls of steel to get into bed with him every night. "How did you do that?" he demanded. "You move as loudly as a pregnant cow." Lucius snorted. "No, I don't. I've hunted white Dathalka and they can hear a footstep 200 scree away." My, aren't we the very soul of modesty? Zera snickered at him, moving to the edge of the training area to grab a towel to wipe her sweat away. "What can I say? I'm just that good." Lucius barked a laugh as he accepted a canteen of water from Tarlaxar, who stood with a gaggle of watchers on the sidelines, all now discussing the match quietly. "Ha! And I am the goddess incarnate. How did you do it?" Zera considered, trying to find the words to explain her empathic senses she had honed to warrior precision over the decades of her training. "I could sense your intention. I felt your focus on the left and baited you on the right." She smirked at him. "You fell for it." Tarlak guffawed, covering his laugh with a cough when Lucius turned a dark look at him. "You did not teach us this in the liri lessons." "I am not sure I can teach it. The skill can be learned, true, but its foundation is the innate empathic sense that Falosians are born with." Lucius returned his attention to Zera, cocking his head, pondering before nodding firmly, a gleam in his eye. She had a sinking feeling that he had come to a decision that she would kick herself for later. "This is a useful ability. We will try to teach this skill to non-Falosians. We will conduct drills, test the limits of this in combat situations. I will prepare suitable battle simulations for us." The other security team members that had been watching their sparring groaned good-naturedly. Zera glowed with pride. That was why Lucius was the first warrior, why despite his unfortunate disability of being male, Zera was happy to follow him. Rather than be offended at being bested, especially by a female, he immediately turned his mind to how he could best use her skills for the benefit of the colony. Colony 29 was in its infancy. Zera had only been here for 2 months, and she loved it. Loved the ruggedness of the forests, the lilac hue of the sky under the double violet suns, the camaraderie of the females. She was even warming to the Verit males, although actually getting to know any of them was proving challenging. She had never met such an intense, controlled group of individuals. They had a pathological, wary respect for females, which was proving a significant barrier to establishing friendships between the species. Still, it was refreshing compared to males of other species, who in Zera's experience often had to have respect for the distaff gender beaten into them. In this colony, they appreciated her. They considered her warrior skills an asset. Here they did not constantly compare her and find her wanting. Lucius turned to regard his small security team, and he began pairing them off for drills. The rec room was large, a single open-plan space with polished flexplas flooring, walls and soaring ceilings of a uniform industrial grey. Matte black nanoblocks were stacked against the back wall, able to be programmed into any recreational or training equipment required, then denatured back into their inert state. The matting on the floor, which they had spread out beneath their feet as the sparring ring, had been created from those same nanoblocks. The pairs spread out, ready to begin their warm-up routines. There was a slight hiss, indicating that the Oculus exterior door had opened, and a diminutive female entered the rec centre, interrupting them. As soon as the door opened, Lucius spun towards the female, his attention laser-focused on her. She started the long trek across the open space towards them, and Lucius moved to meet her. When they came together, he reached out a hand to her, caressing her cheek. She turned her face into his palm, placing a gentle kiss in the centre before she returned to gazing up at him. Zera could feel the heat blazing from them, and she suppressed an unexpected flash of jealousy, rubbing her chest against the ache there. Dinara was one of her closest friends and was everything she was not. Kind, gentle, lusciously feminine, and Lucius adored his mate with an openness that astonished the other Falosians. He made no secret of how besotted he was. His pride and joy in her acceptance of him as her mate shone in his unabashed grin any time he spoke of her. Zera had long ago given up dreams of a great love, had accepted that the very things she liked about herself, her strength and independence, her warrior skills, were qualities few males desired. Still, it would have been nice to have someone truly see her, to have someone look at her, as Lucius looked at Dinara, if only for a moment. "Beloved, what are you doing here?" Lucius's voice was a low rumble. "I need you to come with me, Lucius. Odran is awake. If you need to question him, now is your best opportunity." The sparring pairs started drifting toward them, whispering to each other. Odran, a healer from Verit, had been severely injured a month prior. Trapped in a cave-in, he had been medevaced to safety, and Dinara and her team had operated for over 12 hours to stabilize him. His healing hadn't gone smoothly, and had been plagued by recurring weaknesses and infections that Dinara had struggled to treat. The situation was complicated by the fact that a month earlier, a saboteur had stolen key medical supplies that still had not been located. The medbay team was trying to treat Odran with a skeleton set of equipment and medications, and a resupply ship was months away. To the males of Verit, engineered for robustness and health, it was unheard of. Verit males that received injuries that serious typically died. Few ever needed long-term medical care. Tarlac stepped forward, pausing a respectful distance away from the healer. Lucius turned his head towards Tarlac, not taking his eyes off Dinara, just enough to let Tarlac know he was aware that he had approached. The first warrior's back and jaw tightened for a moment, before Zera saw him consciously relax and nod to Tarlac that he could speak. Lucius and Dinara's mating was still new, and he was ferally protective of her. Only a crevan idiot approached unannounced or surprised Lucius with Dinara. They were likely to end up with Lucius's retractable razor-sharp claws in their guts or throat. "Excuse me, healer. Did you say that Odran had awoken? How is he?" Dinara turned her stunning champagne eyes to the officer. "He is healing, warrior. He is over the worst, and will take time to mend. But your incredible Verit physiology has helped him through the worst of it." Tarlac nodded, relief writ on his face. Odran and he had trained together as Lass, before Odran's healing skills had taken him down a different path. They remained close. "When will we be able to visit?" "Not for a few days more. He is still exhausted and sleeps a lot." She turned her attention back to her mate. "Hence why I need you now, while he is alert." "I see. Why could you not have contacted me on the HUD if the matter was urgent?" He indicated the matte silver ear cuff she wore, that they all wore, a combined comms device and AI interface. The healer smiled impishly. "Because then I couldn't do this." She hauled him down to her, kissing him thoroughly. While the onlookers whooped, her fingers weaved into his short hair. After long moments, she broke off the kiss, grinning ear to ear. "Come first, warrior, duty calls." She held out her hand. Lucius stood stunned for a moment, before snapping out of his shock to take her hand and allow himself to be towed out of the rec centre. He half turned back to his team. "Zera, take over drilling. See if you can teach your technique to the others." Zera nodded, her pride in his trust and confidence making her buoyant, and she turned back to her team, all eager to learn from her skills. Yes, even without a mate of her own, this new life suited her well. Odran was both exhausted and mercilessly bored. It was not a good combination. He had not been outside of his ISO bay in nearly a month, and he longed to feel the wind on his skin, the soil under his feet. Reality didn't give a shit about his boredom or his wishes. He watched his hand as he reached over to grasp a glass of water, noting the slight tremors in his arm from the exertion of lifting the glass to his lips. He was a healer, the best in his generation, and he knew the signs. His body was seriously out of condition, and time and rest were required to repair the damage. The usual pearlescent sheen to his skin was gone, his epidermis pallid and dull. As he moved his arm slowly to lift the glass to his lips, one of his braids swung forward onto his chest, and he noted that its usual silver was now a dull grey, the metallic filaments within brittle. Verit physiology was a marvel, genetically engineered to be resistant to most disease. With physiques highly resistant to damage, illness was almost unheard of. Injuries, yes, but illness, weakness, those were things for others. In its drive to fight off infection and repair the damage to his organs and limbs, his body had cannibalized itself. He had lost significant weight, his metabolism burning through fuel faster than he could consume it. He had been on nutrient drips for weeks, eating as much as he could in his brief semi-conscious phases. Odran was acutely aware that he was sick from malnutrition as much as anything else, literally starving to death as his body tried to heal itself. He swore viciously. Healer he might be, but he was a warrior of Verit foremost. Warriors were not weak, did not lounge about a bed all day. Warriors should have purpose, be doing something. He threw the glass at the wall in frustration, watching the plaz unsatisfyingly bounce to the floor rather than smash, the water dripping down the wall. He snarled at it, exposing sharp canines before lying back on his pillows, panting with exertion at even that much activity. The dark stranger within threatened to take him over, to drown his rational mind in rage, when a gentle, amused voice came from the doorway. Healers always make the worst patients. Come to mock me, my lady. He couldn't hide the bitterness in his voice as he closed his eyes, unable to look at Dinara, to see the compassion and care in her face. You should know me better than that, Odran. Her voice whipped and he jerked his eyes open. Do you see any pity in my expression? Her gaze was clear, her face calm. He refused to answer, remaining mutinously mute, turning to stare at the wall while she continued brusquely. I do not need to stab at you, Odran. You are doing a wonderful job all on your own. She turned her back to him. He's all yours. Odran's eyes shot up to see Lucius fill the doorway. He saw the male inspect him, his lips tighten. Hello, little brother. It is good to see you looking better. Odran gaped in disbelief. I look like an effigy to the midwinter wraith, first warrior. Be careful or I'll steal your firstborn daughter out of your cave at midnight. He mock-snarled and bared his teeth. You might want to get your eyes examined by the healer. All right, you look like a hide I left out in the sun, then let freeze overnight. Is that what you want to hear? Odran glared for a moment before breaking into a reluctant grin. You have the worst bedside manner, Luke, you know that. They gripped wrists, Lucius consciously moderating his strength, shocked at how thin the younger male was as Odran continued. Thank you for coming to see me. Took you long enough. Lucius examined him again with a critical eye. At least you sound more like yourself, the soul of charm and tact as always. He snorted. And if you think I would defy Dinara as either my mate or the colony's chief healer on a matter relating to one of her patients, you have clearly addled your wits as well as damaged your body. Odran shrugged, eager to talk about anything other than his own condition. How is everyone? Is everything going okay? Lucius nodded. Mostly. No more incidents of sabotage since the Falosians killed that male last month. We've got the scans working properly now, so we can cut back on the physical perimeter security patrols all the time. We might even start having something like recreation around here. Odran hummed in agreement. The first month on the colony had been chaos. They had little chance to establish anything like normality. You missed a Falosian festival. They call it Maiden Feast. Really? Indeed. Music, moonshine and barbecue. Odran's eyes opened wide as Lucius nodded. Apparently they occasionally eat meat on feast days. The boys had a great time hunting to provide for the festival. Lucius leaned in close and whispered conspiratorially, We also discovered a fascinating Falosian tradition. Apparently, Falosians bare their breasts when they are seeking a male. You should have seen their native dress. They weave chains around their torsos and breasts, just jewellery on their top half and nothing else. The maman and her lass retreated to their rooms for the night in disgust. Odran eyed him, gauging his sincerity. "Are you serious?" Lucius nodded, and Odran thumped his head back on his pillows with a groan. "How often is this festival?" Lucius shrugged, and Odran cursed again. Luke fell silent, and Odran considered his presence. The male had been as a sire to him, had fostered him as a youth, trained him as a juvenile, taken him on his first hunt. He knew him better than almost anyone, and he didn't do small talk, so Odran waited patiently. Lowering his voice, Lucius cut to the chase. "I know you are convalescing, so I will keep this brief. Did you find it?" Odran sucked in a breath, aware that what he was about to say would change their future forever. "I found it, Lucius. Under the crater, ancient alien tech." Lucius stilled. A month prior, the colonists had discovered that the planet was rich in a rare mineral, xelan. It was momentous and terrifying and placed their fledgling colony at substantial risk. The xylan had the potential to make Falosia and Verit very, very wealthy. It would change the power structure of not just the Alliance, but the entire sector. If the universe found out that xylan was present on their planet, every pirate, prospector, and petty king with access to mercs or armies would converge on them, ready to decimate their untried colony. The only other known system with rich natural xelan in existence was the Talta Group, and they had formed a blockade and no-fly zone to protect themselves, with sales strictly controlled. They paid the equivalent cost of a minor planet each year to the mercenaries that protected them, but the sales of xylan more than made up for it. Colony 29 was painfully exposed so early in its development. Plans were underway to improve the colony's defences, but they would take time. The best strategy for now was secrecy. More of a risk, however, was ancient tech. Throughout the known galaxies, time and again, ancient alien tech and ruins had been discovered wherever xelan was near. The aliens, so long gone even their name had disappeared, had been prolific. They appeared to have created a society that spanned thousands of planets. Common speculation was that they had originally seeded this part of the galaxy with life, and there were just as many theories on where they had vanished to. War, plague, ascendance to another plane of existence. Every few years, the intergalactic entertainment stations produced another serial or movie based on some new, more implausible scenario. An undisputable truth, however, was that wherever xelan had been found, even in small amounts, they had found ancient alien tech nearby. Alien tech was highly prized and controlled. If word got back to the Alliance that there was alien tech on the planet, it would give them grounds to revoke the colony charter, gave the Alliance immediate right of ownership to both the xelan and the tech. It would be a disaster. "Can you tell us how to get to the tech site?" Odran shook his head. "The cave-in that injured me destroyed the path. I know where it is roughly, but I'd need to be there to locate the site itself." Odran hesitated. "It was huge, Luke. Bigger than anything I've ever seen before. Several times the size of the Ardrak. It was the size of the Matriarch's citadel." Lucius's jaw dropped. Until now, they had only found ancient tech in tiny quantities. The largest find to date was a heavily deteriorated scout ship, and the engineering developments from that single ship had spurred invention in dozens of fields: advanced shield tech, propulsion, AI, medical technology, and more. It was shielded. The area was filled with xelan in a configuration the scanner didn't recognize. It's in a hollowed-out chamber. I made it to a tunnel that brought me out at the top of a cliffside near the ceiling. Even standing looking at it, the scanners still insisted that the chamber was empty. It was crazy, like nothing I could ever have imagined. Lucius stood in agitation, scrubbing his hands through his short hair. "We have to get back to that site. We need to know what we are dealing with." He turned his attention back to Odran, his expression changing to one of determination. "The chief healer tells me that your injuries are almost healed, a medical marvel, she calls it. You are ready for rehabilitation. We must prioritize getting you back into shape. We need to get you back out to that site." Odran nodded, blinking back tears in hot eyes, pathetically grateful, his surge of emotion taking him by surprise. Lucius turned his back on him for a moment, under the guise of calling in Dinara, giving him a moment of privacy. When Odran opened his eyes again, Dinara had joined him, her manner once again brisk and professional. "Odran, while you are a healer and I have nothing but respect for your healing skills, healers make terrible patients. For your rehabilitation, you will be treated as any other patient, understand?" Odran nodded. "You have 3 priorities: nutrition, physical strengthening, and stretching. We will assign you a program for each. Under no circumstances are you to attempt cardio exercise, weightlifting, or weapons training until I give you clearance, or I will put you back in this bed myself, understand?" He grinned at her. "Yes, ma'am. Based on your recovery so far, if you follow the program, you will be well enough to travel to the crater site in 4 weeks' time." He opened his mouth to speak, and she cut him off with a glare. "While I'm sure that seems like an extended time frame for a Verit warrior, for any other human template species, you would be months in rehab. Follow the plan, don't re-injure yourself, and you'll be back at it in under a month. Push too hard, damage your still healing organs and bones, and you'll need more surgery, and I'll ship you off-site to a specialist medical facility for treatment. I will not let you set another foot on this planet until I give you full clearance, and you won't believe how slow I can be with medical administration when you piss me off." Her gaze was serious, and he swallowed his objections. Lucius added, "It will give us time to plan the operation. We still need to work out how to get around the interference and get equipment down into the crater safely." Lucius leaned forward and bopped him on the nose like a la to Odran's snarl. "If you're a good patient, I'll let you sit in on the planning sessions." Odran jabbed a finger at Lucius. "As soon as I'm at peak condition, I'll put you on your ass in sparring, old man." "Bring it, pup," Lucius laughed, but Odran could see the relief in his eyes. And for the first time, Odran realized how hard it would have been for this male, his surrogate sire and brother in one, to see him so injured. He could never show Luke how hollow he felt, could never admit how close the dark stranger was to the surface. Dinara blinked rapidly, accessing her HUD through the visual interface, and a blue icon overlaid his vision in the right corner. He looked at it deliberately for a second to accept and open the file. His nutrition plan and training schedule streamed before his vision. The healer placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You should rest more today. I will send your first meal plan tonight. Tomorrow we begin physical therapy, so you'll need to quadruple your calories." He placed a hand over hers, grateful for her support and friendship, for her matter-of-fact manner, for her singular lack of pity. "Thank you, healer, for everything." Dinara nodded and sniffed slightly, her emotions breaking through her professional mask for a split second. "Rest," she said again before smiling wryly. "You're going to need it." Chapter 2. Therapy. Odran sat in the open ward of medbay, his muscles twitching as he stretched his legs out under the watchful gaze of the chief healer. Every day for the past week, she had supervised his therapy, putting him through hours of gentle exercises designed to rehabilitate his weakened physique. However gentle the stretches were, he was left shaking with exhaustion at the end, and cursing internally in pain and embarrassment. He had solidly declined to have anyone else visit him, embarrassed at his state. He silently promised the goddess that he would never ever take his health for granted again. "Don't you have personnel that should do this? Surely the chief healer has better things to do," he growled bad-temperedly, and she cocked an eyebrow at him, utterly unfazed by his surliness. "You want one of your subordinates to see you like this?" He didn't meet her eyes. No, he was sure he didn't want his staff to see this. See him shaking like an elder after shuffling for a few minutes along the length of the ward would certainly damage his professional dignity. It was hard enough getting them to take him seriously as the youngest healer in his generation. Dinara grunted. "Thought not." She studied the readouts next to him. As a courtesy to another healer, she had streamed the data to a portal glass panel so that he could see the data, rather than just viewing it through her own HUD. "You are progressing on schedule. It's amazing. Just a few days ago you couldn't even lift a glass, and now you are walking around. I give you clearance." The medbay oculus opened, admitting the Mammon and her aide, Mammon Lascara. "Blessings of the goddess to you, healer." The graceful trainee Mammon bobbed her head politely before turning to Odran and offering him a gentle smile. "Warrior, we are thankful that you are returning to health." Odran plastered his most charming smile on his face, hiding his grimace of pain. It was ingrained in him never to show weakness, especially to the Mammon. However refined they appeared, it was always skin deep. They were vicious creatures that would lash out at a moment's notice. "Thank you for your consideration, Mammon La." He managed a gracious seated half bow, his silver braids swinging forward to obscure his vision, so he did not see Skara flush with pleasure at his response. Dinara nodded in greeting to the maman and her companion. The maman and the chief healer had a rocky relationship. They had clashed repeatedly in the past, over the maman's flouting of intergalactic law to bring her maman last to the colony as stowaways, and more recently over Lucius and Dinara's mating. They had finally settled into a respectful truce a month ago, when the two of them had defended themselves against a Svobodan spy, intent on sabotaging the colony. The maman visited Dinara daily for medical treatments, after her genetic alterations to enable her to consume colony foodstuffs had been unsuccessful, and Odran noted with concern how thin and pale she had become. Increasingly, the maman could not consume any food at all, and was becoming more and more reliant on the derma nutrition patches that Dinara applied. The chief healer was attempting to develop a more permanent cure, but the colony medical facilities were rustic by intergalactic standards, and the maman stubbornly refused to go off-world to a better-equipped facility. "Maman, Skara, if you would please wait in the ISO bay. I will be with you momentarily. I am just finishing Odran's physical therapy." The maman turned her ice-blue eyes on him. She was wrapped in a dark blue velvet gown with a high collar, stiffened with silver and gold embroidery in an ice lace pattern common on Verit. A white Dathalka fur wrapped over her shoulders, and her head was crowned in a circlet of silver-dripping tiny crystals, gracefully framing her face. The sumptuousness of her attire did nothing to detract from the predatory glare in her eyes. Colony 29 was much warmer than their native Verit, and it was still late summer. The heaviness of her outfit was an unusual choice for her, and Odran wondered if her feeling cold was another symptom of her deteriorating system. The maman La wore a summer-wear version of the outfit. Her dress was also dark blue but sleeveless, and made of a lightweight nanosilk that conformed to her every step. Her pale hair was topped with a tiara that looked spun out of crystalline spiderwebs. Small pearls weaved through her cloud of white curls. "How is the child of my clan this morning?" the maman inquired. Dinara looked at Odran for permission to respond, and he gave her a small nod. "He is doing well, maman. Before you came in, I was about to give him clearance to leave medbay and return to his quarters. He will need to continue to attend medbay for his physical therapy. All he needs is gentle exercise, massive amounts of calories, and rest for a couple more weeks, and he will be back to normal." The maman continued her examination, not taking her raptor gaze away from him as Dinara spoke, and Odran hid a shudder of foreboding at her intense regard. It was never a good idea to draw the attention of a maman, especially not Frey. She may look like a queen, but she was a vicious warrior through and through, and she owned a debt that he could never repay. Finally, the maman turned to the chief healer. "He is not permanently damaged." Odran suppressed the childish urge to snap that he was a fully qualified healer as well, that he could report his own condition just fine. He kept his tongue, knowing that the maman would place more credence in the word of another female than her own male's. "No, maman, he will make a full recovery." The maman nodded. "This is well. We have invested significantly in his training. It would not do for him to be unable to return our benevolence." She raked her gaze over Odran again, assessing him like a prize stud. "Never forget what you owe us, Odran. Your debt to the clan is yet unpaid." The maman turned stiffly and stalked to her ISO bay, her dark dress flaring around her, motioning sharply for her companion to follow her. Dinara turned back to Odran. What did she mean by that? Her champagne eyes held concern, and he attempted to still his roiling feelings, aware that the empath healer would sense his emotions. He shrugged nonchalantly. "You know them, maman. They are the very soul of compassion." "She really did pray for you," a voice said, and they turned back, surprised to see Skara still standing there. The young female wrung her hands, shuffling in agitation, her voice conspiratorially low. "We both did." Another small smile flashed at Odran. "We burned one of the Veritas flowers for you at our shrine. We are glad she listened and granted our wish for your recovery." She hesitated, obviously wanting to say more, before shaking her head and following the maman. Odran felt as if he'd been struck. He was stunned with shock. They had burned Veritas for him. Dinara looked after the females retreating back for a few seconds before sighing and shaking off the distraction. "All right, Odran, that's enough drama for today. Do the exercises, eat all the food on your meal plan, and rest." Her eyes warmed with mischief. I want my second in charge back soon. I'm saving up all the paperwork for you. You should be able to sit at the desk for a few hours a day from next week. Odran groaned. After all, I am honoured by having someone so favoured by the mammon working for me. You should have told me, we'd have rolled out a red carpet for you, hung flower garlands. Odran snorted in laughter, and Dinara relaxed, feeling his mood lift. Odran, what is a veritas flower, if you don't mind me asking? He stilled. It is a flower grown only in the caves under the matriarch citadel on Verit. We named the planet for it when it was colonized. It is said that they can use its distillation as a truth serum. Odran looked at the doorway where the mammon had gone in apprehension. We don't use it that way anymore. We have more efficient compounds, but it has kept much of its cultural significance for the mammon, for all of us. Only a few are harvested each year, and only the most senior mammon, the matriarchs of the clans, can access them. We burn the petals in our most sacred ceremonies to the goddess. He eased his way up to standing, testing to ensure that his legs would take his weight. A mammon burns Veritas when she wishes to convey to the goddess the depth of her feeling, the strength of her desire that her prayer is answered. He paused again. The last time I heard of one being used, it was when the matriarch was giving birth to her fourth daughter, unheard of in living memory. The Veritas was burned in prayer for her safe birthing. Dinara smiled at him. That is lovely, that they value you so. Perhaps under her cold exterior the mammon has genuine care for you. Odran shook his head. Perhaps, healer, or perhaps she believes I shall deliver a service that is worth burning Veritas for. His eyes were troubled. What that could be, I cannot imagine. Dinara patted him gently on the shoulder. That is a problem for another day, my friend. Just focus on getting well for now. Odran nodded and shuffled slowly out of the medbay door, holding onto the wall like a drunkard. He firmly put thoughts of the mammon and his life debt to her out of his mind as he limped his way across the green towards his accommodation. Whatever she demanded, he would pay. His debt demanded nothing less than complete and total sacrifice to her will. His habitation unit was blessedly on the ground floor. He didn't think he could manage stairs right now. He saw a few faces brighten in welcome as he passed, which he waved off. He was acutely aware of how much his body needed sleep, how much he was ready to collapse. He was panting and shaking again by the time he reached his quarters. He instructed his HUD to open the portal as he approached, and he maneuvered himself inside the dark cabin by leaning on the door, the wall, and the bedside unit in turn. Eventually he flopped down onto his bed, pausing only long enough to discard his shoes before he lay back on the mattress. He breathed rhythmically, calming his racing heart. It raced from the old, accustomed anxiety that came with any interaction with the mammon, and a new panic that had formed in the darkness of the cave-in, where he had gasped for air and begged the goddess to deliver him from the crushing pressure of the soil above him. He clenched his teeth and stubbornly refused to let the instruction to activate the lights escape his lips. Somehow, his emotional armour had deserted him. He could not find within himself the ready grin and air of arrogant competence that he usually portrayed. Not even the dark stranger shielded him from the consequences of his decisions today. In years past he had cursed his youthful self for stupidity, for bargaining away his future to the mammon in exchange for the uncertain benevolence of the matriarchs, raged against the unfairness of life that a single decision could forever alter his fate. Now, in the claustrophobia of the dark pressing in on him, he simply felt tired. He was a tamed wolf on a chain of his own making. He sighed deeply, pulling the cover over himself before sleep claimed him, warm and soft, a welcome oblivion. For a moment before being pulled under, he wished he was Alar again, safe in the home of Lucius and his brothers, wished he could run to Luke to make things right, as if the mess he had made of his life could be made better by a bandage or a slice of pie. Chapter 3. The Mother Within. The next time he woke, it was to an insistent buzzing in his ear in the pitch-black cabin. It took him 3 tries to get his parched throat to croak out the word, "Lights," and he cursed as they blazed to life, blinding him. "Dim lights 80%, he growled, blinking as the illumination dimmed to a tolerable level. He could still hear the buzzing, and as awareness slowly returned, he realized it was his HUD, alerting him that someone was at his door. He slumped back onto the bed, covering his eyes with his forearm, and called out, "Open!" He heard the low swish of the door opening. heard the person on the other side hesitate before calling out softly, "Brother, are you alive in there?" "Tarlak." He opened one eye to just a slit, groaning at the light streaming in from the open door, silhouetting his friend in the doorway. "In or out, I don't care, but close the damn door." Tarlak entered the compact unit, and the doorway shushed closed, plunging the room back into gloom. "The healer sent me with your food. Apparently you've been asleep too long. I'm to wake you up and make you eat everything on the tray." "She told me to rest. That female is a menace. I've only been sleeping for—" He checked the time on his HUD, the small display overlaying the bottom right corner of his vision. 36 hours. I've been asleep for 36 hours. Tarlak nodded as he placed the tray on the small round dining table and unloaded the covered plates. "The healer herself checked on you twice, but your vitals were good, so she said best to let you rest. If you were Falosian, she'd have taken you into the med bay, but our physiology put you in a kind of healing hibernation. Now she says it is time to eat." No wonder his throat was so croaky. He was parched. As if suddenly coming fully awake, his body thrummed with tension, sending alerts he was thirsty and hungry, and most of all, desperately needed to pee. He clambered to his feet and lumbered to the tiny bathroom, noting that his limbs felt considerably steadier than before his unscheduled mini-coma. He didn't feel strong, but he also didn't feel like he'd collapse at a stiff wind either. As he completed the necessary bathroom business, Odran realized that there was an unfortunate odor. Giving himself a sniff, he grimaced at the pungent smell. An inventory of his condition told him he probably wouldn't collapse if he had a quick sonic shower. When he left the bathroom a few minutes later, he was feeling significantly improved. Having to take bed baths for a month was more than enough punishment for being so careless as to get injured. He grabbed some loose workout pants and a long-sleeved black sleep shirt, noting with shock when he put the pants on how tight he had to draw the waist. He had lost a significant amount of body mass. He sat down at the table opposite Tarlak, who was balancing on the back legs of his chair. "It is good to see you, brother. Thank you for the food." Odran demolished the meal with a single-minded intensity. His body was screaming for nutrition, having burned through most of his remaining reserves during his long sleep. As he ate, Tarlak brought him up to speed on the colony. The establishment was progressing well, despite the attempts of the saboteur. Their first crops of locally grown food would be ready within weeks, and they had completed the surveys for the power and water facilities. Odran ate every scrap of food on his plate, his stomach groaning with the effort. He sat back with a gusty sigh at the end, sated for the moment. As he looked around, Odran noticed his accommodation properly for the first time since his injury. Last night, or was that the day before, he had simply passed out without a light on. Now he saw what he had missed in his haste to eat, and his breath caught in his throat. His cabin was decorated with tiny woven figures of all sizes, strung in rows across the ceiling, around his bed, and over the kitchenette area. Made from local plants, there were representations of the triple goddess, Dathalka, Hirun-Ruir, Vlamin, Tothas, all the sacred heraldry of the Verit clans. There were even tiny woven starbursts representing the goddess's eternal mate, the universe itself. Over and over again, there must have been hundreds of them. "Tarlak," he whispered. His brother looked at the strings and smiled. "Vorden organized it. We all chipped in with a few effigies each. You couldn't have visitors, so we each made you one. For each day you were unwell." Odran reached out to touch a gentle finger to one figure, a tiny, perfect goddess. Interwoven with 3 shades of purple leaves, the gradient of colours coalesced in her 3 faces, one in light, one in shadow, and one in the darkness. "That one was Vorden. He's a magician with his weaving." Odran swallowed, his chest tight. His heart was full of love and affection for his clan brothers. Tarlak smiled in understanding, then handed him another one. "This is from me." It was a terrible weaving, a rough starburst, just a few leaves wrapped together to show the 4 spears of light from the central knot. Odran laughed out loud. "Thank you again. I have no words." Tarlak nodded and leaned forward to clasp Odran's shoulder. "We'll burn them at the next goddess moon, release all our fear and pain back into the universe." Odran smiled and clasped his brother's hand. "Until then, you get to live with them all as a reminder of how much you scared the shit out of us all. Honestly, what kind of Verit male gets hurt by a little tumble? I was caught in a rock slide. Half a damned cavern fell on me. We are Verit, we grew up in caves and ice flows. Tarlak tutted and waved a finger at him. Careless healer, Odran chuckled. The teasing was familiar, easing him with the normality in a way nothing else could. How long will I be hearing about this? We might stop when your grandsons come of age. Maybe. Tarlak grinned broadly. Come on, brother, let's get you outside for a bit. Odran hesitated. He felt better, but wasn't sure if he was up to wandering about. It's all right, we aren't going far, just to sit on the edge of the green. The Falosians have introduced us to a new form of exercise recently. Several of them meet each day on the green to go through a stretching routine. Peyton finally worked up the courage to ask the cadet whether it would be rude for some males to watch. Tarlak grinned again. When the cadet stopped laughing, she solemnly informed him that if her people had wanted no one to see their exercise, they wouldn't be doing it on the public green in full view. She said that the ladies would welcome anyone that wanted to watch or learn, provided they were respectful. Odran's interest was piqued. The first couple of weeks on the colony had been chaos, and after being out of it for weeks, he had had very little opportunity to interact with the Falosians. He truly liked females and enjoyed their company. He had been looking forward to getting to know them better, both as individuals and as a group. He had reviewed everything he could on their culture in the weeks before arriving at the colony, and they were a fascinating people. The healer said that if you felt up to it, you could watch. In another day or so, you can join in. She said that it'll be excellent exercise for you to regain your strength. Odran pushed away the yawning fear and panic at the thought of his weakness. The dark stranger scratched at him, demanding that he hide his vulnerability. He stood abruptly, determined to attend, refusing to let the anxiety win, to pick up the threads of his normal life. Tarlak looked at him quizzically for a moment, as they stepped out into the late afternoon sunshine. He took a deep breath, scenting the air, enjoying the vibrancy of life around him after weeks in the sterile medbay. He could smell cooking from the communal mess, and his stomach grumbled again, unbelievable given the massive quantities of food he had just inhaled. More distantly, he could hear someone singing, the tune floating on the breeze unknown to him. They slowly ambled towards the green where Odran saw several other males sitting on the grass, including another of his close friends, Peyton. Peyton immediately rose to greet him, giving him a short, fierce embrace. A half-dozen Falosian females walked towards them across the grass. He recognized a couple of them, including Fila, a bold female and Dinara's closest friend. She was a regular visitor in Medbay. In the lead was a stunning female he had seen around, but never officially met before, carrying a bundle wrapped in heavy brown material. She was tall and muscular, with a mane of brown and gold hair in a single braid down her back, the sides of her head shaved. Her arms and legs, bare in her workout gear, were covered in intricate tattoos, swirling and blending seamlessly into a detailed, elegant whole. She was stunning, powerful. She exuded a strength and serenity that he could sense clear across the grass. "Looks like we have an audience today," called Fila teasingly. Odran nudged Tarlak. "Who is that?" He motioned to the tattooed female. "That's Zera, one of the senior security officers. She's amazing. You should see her spar. She's so fast you don't even see her coming." The open admiration and enthusiasm in Tarlak's voice was new, and Odran realized again that in his month of recuperation, the colonists had bonded and developed friendships. Examining the striking female again, he wondered if Tarlak and the security officer had formed more than a friendship. If so, he was pleased for them. Tarlak was a fine male and an excellent warrior, and the female was glorious. He felt a pang of jealousy that he wrestled into submission with unyielding focus before it could take root. After a long, considering look at the assembled males, the females crossed to the empty space and began setting up. It turned out the bundle Zera carried contained long, thin sparring sticks. "They are called Liri. She's been teaching us how to use them," Tarlak whispered. "They sting like the breath of the winter wraith if they catch you." He rolled up his sleeve to show a fine red welt on the back of his forearm, already darkening into a bruise. The females paired up and began to move through a series of martial art forms using the sticks. Zera moved among them, observing, correcting positions here and there, and periodically calling out a command in an unfamiliar language. It wasn't Falosian, or their HUDs would have translated it instantly. Each time Zera called out, the group increased their speed another notch. As their speed progressed, the watching males grew silent, their attention rapt. The women were breathtaking, graceful and deadly. They moved through the forms seamlessly, their stinging attacks like serpent strikes. He heard whispering behind him. It was Dinara who had quietly joined the watching males. "Just ask them!" "No," came the hushed response from one male. "I promise they won't mind. They'd love to share it with you," she replied. "What is it you want to ask that you think they won't like?" Lucius inquired as he walked up to join the group, putting his arm around his mate and pulling her into the curve of his body. Peyton flushed. Some males would like to know if the ladies would show them some moves. The security personnel get to spar, but there are others on the colony that would like the opportunity. Lucius considered the request. "All right, but not sparring, not yet. I've been on the receiving end of the Lyri sting, and it is not for the inexperienced. Perhaps Zera would be open to teaching some forms as an introduction." Noting that the females were on a water break, Lucius wandered over. "Videk," he inquired respectfully. "My males have been watching your practice." "We noticed," she grinned at him. "Some of the other colony males are interested in learning. Would you mind teaching them a little?" She brightened, considering. "Very well. We'll do a slow demonstration of the forms to begin with." She gave him a secretive smile. "The forms are not always performed with Lyri. Many have other purposes." Zera huddled with the females, whispering before they spread out into a diamond pattern facing their audience, Dinara moving to join them to friendly nods of welcome. Zera stood formally before the group at the point of the diamond, hands palm up in front of her, legs shoulder-width apart, her body relaxed and centered. "This is Delma Layat. Delma, the mother goddess. Lay, the energy within. At home, literally channeling the energy of the goddess within." As she spoke, she moved her arms gracefully, palms up at hip height, raising her arms to cross before her chest, then finally fanning her arms out before her and settling into her starting position again. Her moves were smooth, precise, and her voice hushed. It is a commonly taught martial art on Falosia, and is considered basic self-defense. She pushed her arms down, palms to the floor, left knee raised, the Falosians echoing her motion. "In the morning the suns rise." She transitioned to the next move, her left leg swinging behind her in a circle as she rotated 360 degrees, her body bending forward gracefully, arms extending in front of her. "The suns project the energy of the universe." Her voice was rich, capturing her audience's attention as she told the story of the day of the Mother Goddess. In time with her controlled, elegant movement, the land awakens, another move, and the animals rise, another move. The water sings. The birds fly. The moves continued on and on as one with her recitation. The mother cradles all within her. Zera concluded on her knees, arms stretched above her. And the universe sleeps. The males were spellbound. No one dared break the silence. The Falosians slowly stood and returned to their first positions before Zera started again. Her voice was hard this time, the contrast from the hushed ambience she had created jolting the audience alert. "There is another name for these forms as well, the Mersky, the raging storm, because Mother Nature is not just creation but destruction. For life to have meaning there must be death. Watch the Mersky." The women as one called out, a wordless sound of power and rage that raised the hairs on the male's arms. They began the forms again, this time with rapid, violent movements. The down, pushed palms and raised knee of the first stretch became a move to knee an opponent in the face. The slow rotation of the leg became a whipped round house kick. Odran gaped at their grace and fury, at the raw energy pouring from them. Their moves were so synchronous that they reminded him of a flock of birds moving together. They were magnificent. Again and again his attention was drawn to the tattooed female, Zera, as she moved through iterations of the forms. Her beautiful face was tranquil as she progressed through the moves with devastating power. Her limbs were supple and strong, her breath even. She seemed the living embodiment of the goddess in her warrior aspect. Dalat Rai, bringer of judgment and passion, protection and righteous fury. One by one the females concluded their demonstration, kneeling on the tufted grass. He could see a fine shimmer of sweat around Zera's hairline, and when her eyes caught his he saw a blaze of triumph and energy within. Odran inclined his head in a slight nod of respect from one warrior to another, and she winked at him. After the ritual and solemnity of the moves, he was startled into laughter. He chuckled aloud at her irreverence, breaking the spell that had fallen over the assembled audience, and they erupted in exclamations and chatter as the groups merged. Several of the males brought water bottles over, and Lucia spun Dinara around in a circle, kissing her soundly. Odran joined them. "Chief Healer, this is the exercise you want me to try. I think you missed me in medbay and are trying to hasten me back." Odran tugged on a curl that had escaped Dinara's plait, and she swatted him away affectionately. "It will be good for you to build up your strength again. Healer's orders." Odran nodded, his eyes following Zera. He certainly wouldn't mind an opportunity to spend time in her presence, and if he needed some one-on-one instruction, well, she could hardly fault him for that. Cheered by the thought, he resolved to check with Tarlak if they had formed a bond. If not, he would seek her out at the first opportunity, for his health, of course. Chapter 4, Prickly Path.
Encrypted transmission from Agent Hoyert. Plan A failed. Moving to Plan B, Operation Olive Branch is activated. Envoy dispatched with security force to Colony 29. End transmission.
Odran wandered into the mess hall the next morning, feeling significantly better after more food and another solid 12 hours of rest. Sleep had helped quiet the incipient panic in his mind, well enough that he could once more be Odran, the healer. Odran, the friend with the ready grin and charming manner. The dark stranger was securely constrained by chains of protocol. Looking around, he was pleased to see the tattooed female warrior present. He grabbed a tray of breakfast, enduring the good-natured jokes from the males on kitchen duty about the quantity of food he was consuming, and wandered over to the corner where Zera sat. "May I join you, my lady?" She looked up in surprise, her face frowning at the interruption for a moment before smoothing out as she recognized him. She offered him a professional smile. "Healer, what can I do for you?" Odran smiled broadly in return, launching a charm offensive, tipping his head towards his laden breakfast tray. "May I join you for breakfast? There is a matter I'd like to discuss." "Of course, please do." She stood slightly as he moved around the table to sit down, and he quashed a spike of irritation. Did she expect him to fall like a tottering elder? He was still weak but no longer an invalid. Once at the table, he busied himself with arranging his meal on the tray and picked up a spoon to start on the heavy porridge, murmuring appreciatively when he found it laced with dried fruits and sugar. "How are you recovering, healer?" she asked politely. "Well, thank you. I feel much stronger today, even compared to yesterday. I think sleeping in my own bed has made all the difference. Medbay is a busy place. Last time I was in there, the nurses woke me up every hour or so during the night for observation. I felt like I had no rest at all." "You were injured?" He frowned, disliking the thought of her harmed. She shrugged. "Not badly. Like I said, they kept me in for observation." She leaned back in her chair, stretching her long legs out to cross in front of her. Her demeanour betrayed her curiosity. They had barely spoken a word since arriving on the colony, their paths rarely crossing. "I witnessed your demonstration of martial arts yesterday." Zera bristled. "You make it sound like we gave a performance. Delma Layat is a lethal martial art. It was not a demonstration, it was training. In the right hands, it is a glorious ballet of battle." He smiled patiently at her, and he saw her physically resisting the urge to smack him. "I witnessed your training yesterday. It was impressive." Zera bared her teeth. "For a female?" He clenched his jaw. "That's not what I said." She raised a sardonic eyebrow at him. "It's what you meant." Odran was incensed. He would never disrespect a female. "If you believe your own gender to be inferior, don't go dragging me into it. If you like, I can recommend a good therapist to help you get to the bottom of your insecurity," he replied coolly. She snorted out a laugh, taking a swig of her caffeine drink. He studied her relaxed arrogance, and it dawned on him. "You're making fun of me." She smiled tightly. "Only a little. You bite too easy, healer. Your preconceptions colour your speech without you being consciously aware of it." His mouth gaped and she fluttered her eyelids at him. "Oh, you're cute when you're flustered." He considered his response, intrigued, and studied his opponent. He had been a healer for years and had dealt with patients of all kinds. He considered himself an excellent judge of people, but Zera, she was prickly. He couldn't quite get a read on her. He felt like he was standing on quicksand. Excitement stirred. He loved a challenge. Whatever strange private battlefield he had unexpectedly stumbled into, he was determined to win. He forced himself to relax and he leaned forward casually towards her. Zera frowned slightly, wariness behind her eyes, sensing the change in him. Let's see how she enjoyed being off balance. He reached over and snagged her cup from in front of her before she could respond, leaning back to mirror her position, his muscular legs crossed in front of him, and took a long draw. He hummed appreciatively at the taste. He would need to add this to his nutritional rotation. "I only bite if you ask me, very, very nicely." He gave her a slow, wicked smile, pleased to see the minute biochemical changes in her response, her eyes slightly dilated, a gentle flush on her collarbone. He fascinated Zera. Damn, the man was too charming for his own good. The healer was hot, absolutely flamingly hot. Long and lean, with a mass of multi-hued metallic braids and intense sapphire blue eyes. There was a distinctly feline energy to him, an inquisitiveness and sense of elegance that appealed to her. Perversely, it put her back up. In her experience, males that were both gorgeous and charming were assholes. After a long moment, she smiled slowly at him in return, determined not to let him see how much that wicked grin had sent warm tendrils through her. "You know how to play, healer. I'll give you that." She stole her cup back and lifted it in salute. "The chief healer has instructed me to undertake light exercise as part of my physical therapy." She nodded, and there was another long pause. He cleared his throat. "I would like to request you to teach me some moves from Delma Layat. If you agree, I am available at your convenience. I am not yet cleared for duty, so I can work around your shift schedule for the next few days." Zera examined him frankly, considering his physique. Try as she might, she couldn't believe that the male was here, walking around, sitting upright and flirting with her. His injuries had been horrific. Most other species would have been months, maybe even years in recovery, not mere weeks. Zera's practiced eye noticed his lingering pallor, the dark circles under his eyes and the lankness in his silver hair. Her empathic senses extended to him, and she picked up the faintest resonance of darkness. Filing the information away for later consideration, she pondered his request. The healer had taken her breath away when she'd first met him. His skin had shimmered and glowed tan in the simulated sunlight of the colony ship, his twisting braids gleaming with silver, iron and steel. He had been lean but with defined muscles that hinted at his warrior lineage. The male before her now was still handsome, but without all of that softness. His cheekbones pushed at his skin, his cheeks hollowed, and he had lost significant muscle. It would take a lot of work to build him up to his former self. She opened her mouth to decline, and was astonished when she heard herself respond, "All right, I am off shift. Meet me at the rec center in an hour and we can get started today if you like." Odran grinned, relieved that he had navigated the thorny path of interacting with the prickly warrior. "I am at your command, Verit." As Zera rose to leave, she had last words of instruction for him. Wear comfortable shoes and loose clothing. Before Odran could ask any more questions, she spun around and he watched her retreat, her long, thick braids swaying back and forth in time with her steps. He tucked into his breakfast with enthusiasm, happy at the prospect of having a purpose for the day, rather than passing yet another day recuperating in bed. He would need fuel for his exercise. Something told him that the V-deck would not go easy on him, and he bared his teeth, buoyed by the challenge. Chapter 5. Training. Zera leaned against the corrugated wall of the rec center, enjoying the morning sunlight. The brisk air was refreshing against her skin. She twisted a piece of grass in her hands, methodically stripping it in waxy purple layers while her thoughts wandered. She waited for Odran to arrive, wondering again what in the goddess had come over her when she had agreed to this. The practice of Delma Layat, while commonly used for both exercise and self-defense, was deeply spiritual. Zera had grown up with the forms, spending hours with her mother, sisters and grandmothers, lost in the ebb and flow of energy in the movements. She had taught hundreds of females, but never a male. She sighed in aggravation again, throwing away the denuded stalk. Who was she kidding? She knew exactly why she was doing this. This colony was a chance at a new life, and she had made the start of genuine friendships here, Dinara and Lucius among them. Zera respected the first warrior. She deeply wanted to be worthy of his respect in return. She didn't fully understand the relationship between Odran and Lucius, but Lucius doted on Odran like a son or younger brother. She simply couldn't refuse him. Everyone liked Odran. She couldn't afford to alienate the community. She needed this new life to work. Also, she admitted to herself, She liked him. Not many males could go toe-to-toe with her. You know, in some cultures that's considered a sign of sexual frustration. Zera started and looked up. She had been so busy wool-gathering that she hadn't heard Odran arrive. So much for her vaunted warrior training. Annoyed that this male had her so distracted, she cocked an eyebrow at him. I can assure you, healer, that should I wish to work out some tension, I would have no trouble finding partners. Odran's eyes crinkled. I would never dare to suggest otherwise, my lady. I was merely making an anthropologic observation. She pointed a finger at him in warning, resisting the urge to grin back at him like a fool. He really was too charming for his own good. She shrugged the tension from her shoulders, determined to keep things professional, and turned to lead him into the coolness of the rec center. Zera moved to the stacked nanoblocks in the corner and connected them to her HUD. She double-blinked deliberately, looking at the icon that floated in front of her vision, and opened the nanoblock programming application. The world around her blurred as the carousel options of the block programming spun up in neon orange in front of her. She reached her arms out, using her left hand to move the rolling menu to the left until she found the program for padded mats. Using her right hand, she pinched her fingers to pull out and expand the selected option, inputting her size and firmness requirements, before waving her hand over the confirmation icon. Odran had moved up behind her to watch with interest, and she grabbed him by the arm to pull him away from the blocks. Have you seen the industrial nanoblocks in action, healer? He shook his head, eyes cat-bright with interest. Only the small medical versions. She resisted the urge to grin at his inquisitiveness. The lights in the rec center flashed red in warning, and both of their HUDs displayed a warning icon, highlighting the out-of-bounds floor area as Zera spoke. An automated message streamed into their visuals and was broadcast overhead. All personnel clear nanite area. We need to stay outside the designated area while the blocks are reforming. She pointed to the floor, where an inlaid crystal line encircled most of the middle of the rec room. The crystal is the energy conduit that supplies the nanites in the blocks. It is ill-advised to impede forming blocks. Odran nodded again, his eyes flicking to her hand still loosely wrapped around his forearm. She followed his gaze and flushed with embarrassment. My apologies, healer. She moved away slightly, her hand tingling in the touch's aftermath. Please call me Odran. If we are going to be training together, we don't need to be so formal. Zera gave him an arch look. Very well, you may call me Videk. He chuckled, and she felt her heart skip a beat at the joyous sound, and she ruthlessly stuffed the feeling down. She couldn't afford to catch feelings for this male. As the goddess will it, my lady. He bowed slightly and she reached up, and with a gentle fingertip nudged his face back to the forming blocks. Odran sucked in a sharp breath at her touch, but was distracted by the sight in front of him. During their interaction, the blocks had gradually changed consistency, from solid inert cubes to a gelatinous texture. The gel appeared to be slowly losing its structural integrity. On closer inspection, he realized the gel was moving. It crawled across the ground to the middle of the floor, where it leveled out into a long, wide, flat rectangle in the dimensions Zera had specified. Within seconds, the gel had resolidified into a shiny black padded mat, suitable for martial arts practice. It was highly disconcerting. Zera directed Odran to sit on the mat, and she took position opposite him, cross-legged. She sniggered as he cautiously approached the mat, towing it carefully before moving opposite her. For today we will start with breathing and some gentle stretching. She held up a hand to forestall the complaint she sensed was coming. Delmalayat is much more challenging than it looks. The forms require precision. Believe me, it will surprise you how sore you will be after just an introductory session. It works muscles you never knew you had. Odran nodded, easing himself down into the seating position, hiding a wince as he crossed his legs. His thigh and calf had been seriously damaged in the rockfall, and they protested the unaccustomed pose. Close your eyes and follow my breathing pattern. Start by exhaling entirely. We will breathe in through the nose for 5 counts, hold for 8 counts, and exhale for 10 counts, she demonstrated. After several iterations of the breathing, Zera opened her eyes and examined Odran critically. She waited until he had completed another round and stopped him. You are not breathing deeply enough. You must expand your ribcage, move your diaphragm. Let me show you. She knelt and took his hands and placed them around his ribs on either side, index fingers just touching over his ribcage. She couldn't help admiring his powerful forearms and long, talented fingers. She had the absurd desire to stroke down his front, feel the tension in his muscles. She sat in front of him, leaning forward, her hands over his. "Now look at me. Breathe with me." She locked eyes with him and inhaled, watching him do the same. Holding her breath for 8 counts, she was acutely aware of his closeness and searing intimacy of their visual connection as they breathed out together. She deliberately looked away, shaking off her awareness of him. She then mimicked the motion on herself. When you inhale, you should see your hands move away from each other, then return to fingertips touching when you exhale completely. Watch me do it. Watch the movement of my ribcage measured by the fingertips. She resumed her cross-legged posture, closed her eyes and cycled through the breathing again. She felt his gaze, his awareness of her the entire time. When she had finished, she looked at him, and for another electric instant they locked eyes. Time stretched between him, and she saw his pale blue eyes flood navy before he closed them and resumed breathing, this time with proper ribcage expansion. She had no idea what it meant, but resolved to ask Dinara at the first opportunity. After the breathing exercises, she had Odran stand next to her and ran him through a series of stretches. Zera clicked her teeth in irritation. Odran refused to do the movements slowly and kept attempting to increase speed to martial arts rather than stretching. "If you won't follow my instructions, we will end this now." He glared at her. "My apologies, but this feels ridiculous. The movements will build up your strength gently over time, like this." She demonstrated again, deliberately slowing the movement as she drew her arms up into a stretch above her head, before sweeping down in front of her to drop into a deep lunge. Odran felt his eyes drawn again to her muscular physique. Her loose workout gear showed her smooth, lean muscles and her natural grace. He knew that being attracted to her was a terrible idea, but he couldn't help being drawn to her humour, her strength. "Odran!" She snapped her fingers in front of him. "Where are you?" He blushed, realising that he had blanked out, engrossed in watching her elegant movements. He wanted so badly to reach out and run his hand along the curve of her back, down to her round ass, to shape the softness he saw there in his palm. "My apologies, Videk, what did you say?" She frowned and chewed on her lip. "Perhaps we should finish here for today if you are becoming fatigued." His heart spiked. "No, my apologies. I was distracted, that's all." She reached out with her empathy and felt the blast of admiration from him, and her responding smile was slow and a little wicked. "I see." He blushed again and she found herself charmed. He was a beautiful male, and when he wasn't being a cocky ass, he had a disarming manner that had surprised her into laughter more than once today. He shrugged, chagrined. "You can't blame me." Her smile widened further. "At least you have good taste." He looked at her boldly. "I do." She laughed, a dark, husky sound. "All right, charming, show me what you've got." His brow furrowed in confusion. "Huh?" She reached over and tugged on a braid. "Do the exercise. Slowly." "Yes, my lady." He mock bowed to her and moved into the stretch stance. He had barely begun before she was calling him to stop. "Still too fast, here." She moved beside him and ran her hands along his shoulders and upper arms. Her touch was impersonal, supporting his arms while she guided him through the movements at the correct pace. The feline him wanted to arch his back for her touch, to lean into her and rub himself against her, cover her in his scent, to demand that her impersonal tough linger become decidedly personal. He had to keep reminding himself that this female was not his. Attempting to cover his rising lust, he quipped, "You know, if you want to touch me, you need only ask. You don't need to keep finding excuses." She barked a soft laugh, her face next to his as she moved his shoulders back through the movement. "You wish. You aren't that charming." "Yes, I am. Everyone says so." He smiled smugly, playing along. "The maman says I'm the pride of the clan," she sniggered. "I must remember to let Lenora know we need some renovations in here." "For what?" "To accommodate your massive ego." "It's not just my ego that's massive." "That's what all the males say." "Verit males are superior specimens." He bared his fangs at her, and the subtext was not subtle. "Bad kitty," she responded mildly. "Would you like a measuring device? It would be my pleasure to present myself for your curiosity. For scientific purposes, of course." "I'm not touching your device for anyone's pleasure. Now focus." She flicked him on the nose. He flashed a grin in response and performed the stretch, this time with what felt like agonizing slowness. She nodded once on completion, satisfied, and moved on to demonstrate the next stretch. At the end of the session, Odran's muscles were shaking with fatigue. "I can't believe that moving so slowly is so challenging. I haven't felt this bad since my first days of warrior training." "Well, you are still recovering, and from what I've observed of Verit training, I don't think you train for flexibility much. It's primarily about strength and stamina." She was correct. "Get some sleep and a nutritious breakfast tomorrow. I'll see you at 1000 hours before I have to go on shift." "Yes, ma'am." She cocked her head, looking at him curiously. "You may call me Zera if you wish." Touched, he bowed slightly. "Thank you for the honor, Zera." The walls were closing in. The dust was everywhere, clogging his throat. He couldn't breathe. He scrabbled against the rockfall, breaking a claw in his panic to find a way out. The sizzle of agony became another note in a symphony of pain in his body, his thigh and side screaming at him. He could feel wetness flowing down his left side, was aware that he was bleeding profusely. He tore at the rocks and succeeded only in creating another small slide of pebbles, successfully pinning himself by his legs. His rational brain took over, corralling the panic, pushing his fear into a ball at the back of his mind. He forced himself to lie still and reduce his heart rate. Motion was only stirring up the dust and creating more debris, making it harder to breathe. His racing heartbeat was only accelerating his blood loss. He lay there, still waiting for rescue. It never came. Oh, goddess, the roof was falling. Odran awoke with a gasp, his body drenched with sweat, his heart pounding. He gulped in air and threw his covers back, falling to his knees on the floor with a painful thud. He breathed deeply, attempted to calm his racing mind, reminding himself over and over again. "I got out. They came for me." His body was filled with agitated energy. He had to move, to burn off some of this stress. He checked his HUD. It was nearly 5 a.m. He could go for a run. As he stood, he winced. Maybe not. Kneeling on the floor wasn't helpful for his healing legs. He winced at the thought of Dinara's reaction to him breaking her no cardio rule. Nope, definitely not worth it. He wished Zera was up so they could practice. The last couple of days with her while she trained him had brought him a peace and joy that he hadn't felt in years. He stilled. Yes, that was it. He could practice Delma Layat. He didn't need to wake Zera so early. He pulled on his shorts and tee and went to the rec center. After days of training, he was more than familiar with how to set up the nanomats. In the dim, early morning, he ran through the routines. He used the forms as medication, sweeping his body through the motions again and again, enjoying the burn in his muscles, rebuilding after their long convalescence. When Zera finally arrived, he was calm and warmed up. She looked at him quizzically, unused to him being there before her, but ready to begin. Chapter 6. An exercise in self-control. Training. Odran was an exercise in self-control and rapidly becoming Zera's preferred brand of personal torture. For the past few days, she'd spent 2 hours every morning teaching him Delma Layat. He had proved an apt student, picking up the moves with ease and mastering the forms. Today they were going to graduate to sparring for the first time. From the very first day they had kept up their friendly flirting banter, and those hours with Odran were rapidly becoming the high point of her day. Zera was both excited and apprehensive about getting up close to him. There was no way to spar without getting in each other's personal space, and it was becoming harder to remind herself that she was meant to be tutoring him and needed to keep a professional distance. Zera walked into the rec center, unsurprised to find Odran there before her. Typically, Zera arrived first, set up the nanoblocks and had a few minutes to settle herself. However, the past 2 days when she entered, Odran was already there practicing. She noticed that today, from the way his skin glistened and his shirt stuck to his back, he had been working out for some time already. His muscle tone and form had improved significantly in just the past few days. How was it possible for him to be so good-looking, especially after working out? "Good morning, Odran. Getting an early start?" "Good morning, Zera." He flashed her a dazzling smile that did not meet his eyes. It immediately rang warning bells. Odran was far too charming for his own good, but never insincere. "I am. Dinara had no need of me at medbay this morning, so I wanted to go through some stretches first." "Oh, okay. Just be careful not to overdo it. You don't want to strain anything. You're still on your recovery plan. He slashed an irritated glance at her. I know my own limits. I won't overdo it. I need to push myself to build up my strength. She held up her hands in defense. All right, don't snap at me. I'm just concerned. Don't be. I'm fine. He calmed his voice, attempting to reassure her, but his shoulders remained stiff. It was so unlike the Odran that she knew it took her by surprise, got her back up. What the hell crawled up your butt and died this morning? You don't need to be such a dick about it. Some people would appreciate having people that care about them. Some people aren't a qualified healer and a warrior, and therefore able to know what the hell they are doing. I'm not an invalid. I'm perfectly capable of doing a few stretches unsupervised. She glared at him, and he turned his back on her dismissively. All righty then, that puts me in my place. Whatever the fuck this attitude is, pull it back, Odran. I'm doing this as a favour. I've got better things to do with my time than put up with your drama. Odran didn't respond, and resumed his stretching. Zera dropped her bag and took up her own position, moving into her warm-up stretches. She kept a discreet eye on Odran, concerned about his sweating. If all he was doing was stretching, he shouldn't be that worked up. The positions of Del Malayat were intense, but rarely presented as sweating unless he was doing them wrong. She watched him move into the 5th form, advanced level, the stinger. He stretched forward, lifting a leg back behind him and above his head. Slowly he extended the stretch, lifting onto the toes of his foot on the ground. He raised his arms up and out into a dive position and held the stretch. With a critical eye she watched his form, grudgingly impressed with the precision. She waited for him to release, noting that he had passed a minute, the recommended maximum time for this move. As she watched, she noticed slight tremors start in his muscles, a tightening in his jaw, his calf muscles not. Enough, Odran, release it. He didn't respond. I said enough, Odran, you're holding too long. He remained silent, eyes closed, ignoring her. I said stop it now. She became increasingly concerned when she saw his calf cramp. His ankle began to hyperextend. She moved over beside him and struck at a pressure point behind his knee, and his entire leg crumpled, and he landed face first on the floor. What the hell are you doing? He yelled, as he attempted to push himself up. What am I doing? Are you insane? You nearly tore the ligaments in your leg. I know what I'm doing, he growled through gritted teeth. Oh really? Come on then, healer, let's see you get your ass up off the floor. She folded her arms and waited, watching him struggle to get his legs and arms under him, watching them shake. Come on, get up. You've got this so well in hand, so get up off the damned floor. He pushed himself up onto his knees before he fell again, his leg cramping and contorting. Oh, for the love of the goddess! She knelt and took his leg in her hands. He clamped his teeth together, forcing himself into stillness, determined not to call out in pain. She dug her thumbs into his calf muscle and firmly massaged his leg to release the strain. He swore a blue streak and his claws flashed out from his fingertips to dig into the black nanomat padding. She said nothing, just firmly massaged his leg, loosening up the cramped muscles and tendons. He watched her, feeling the slight calluses on her hands as she competently moved his ankle in a small circle, assessing the damage. Now that he wasn't in the haze of his workout, he realized with a chill that she was right. He had been a hair's breadth from tearing the ligaments in his leg. The shock of his own stupidity brought him crashing down into reality. He pushed himself up into a seated position, his leg still draped across her knees, and retracted his claws. Zera gently pushed his leg back onto the floor and looked at him silently. Look, Zera, I'm sorry. No, you're not. She studied him. My empathic senses aren't strong for a Falosian, but even I can tell that you aren't sorry. Something is riding you, Odran. You nearly caused yourself real damage today. She shook her head, and he saw in her eyes that she had made a decision. Speak to someone. You need to work this out because today you made a reckless choice that could have harmed yourself. Next time you might make a reckless choice that harms someone else. He didn't know how to respond. She was right. Our training is over. Tell Dinara that you need another form of physical therapy. Please, Zera, don't end this. I'm sorry I was a Crevan, but no, Odran. My mind is made up. You need to talk to someone about this. Get some therapy or something before it sinks in and takes root. She stood up and dusted herself off, extending a hand to him. Come on, I'll help you to medbay. You need a compression bandage and some ice on that. He batted her hand away, bitterness making him cruel. No, I need the training. I need to get fit again. If you won't help me with that, then I need nothing from you. She looked at him for another long moment. Suit yourself then. She turned and stomped off, grabbing her bag on the way out, and left Odran sitting there on the mats alone. Zera exited the rec centre and turned left, dipping into the corner between the rec centre and the habitation pods, her heart racing in anger and fear. And hurt, her mind whispered. Admit it, you were starting to like him and he just burned it to the ground. She peered around the corner and waited. Furious as she was, she couldn't just leave without making sure he sought medical care. Eventually, she watched Odran appear from the rec centre and limp painfully towards the medbay. She blew out a long breath. She'd been half expecting that he would ignore her advice and just go back to his own unit to sulk in the darkness. Whatever this was, he needed to deal with it. It was a poison eating away at him. ******, Odran was furious and embarrassed as he limped into medbay. He had not made such a stupid error in training since he was a LAR. The past few days he had woken every night with the same nightmare, being trapped underground, dying. Except this time, no one came to save him. He rummaged in the emergency med stores, pulling out a cold pack and a set of compression bandages. Planting himself on the chair in his office and propping his foot up on a storage box, he set about bandaging himself. As he did, he cursed their limited medical supplies. Anywhere else he would have simply applied a catalyst patch, which would have accelerated his body's own immune system to restore the damage. But here they were rationing medical supplies, saving them for essential injuries only. Grimly, he admitted that if one of the warriors had made such a mistake, he would have referred them for therapy and assessment of their competence and fitness for duty. In clan interstellar warfare, there was no room for recklessness or failure to follow commands and safety protocols. "Do you want to talk about it?" a voice inquired. He looked up to see Dinara standing in the doorway. "Nope." Her lips thinned. "I see. Let's start again then." She pulled up a chair. "We're going to have a little chat, Healer Odran." He stiffened at the formality. "Dinara, your attention is not required here. It is a sprain, nothing more." "Then why are you broadcasting your anger and pain so loudly?" "What?" Every Falosian for half a scree can feel it, and frankly it's distressing. Dinara's eyes unfocused, in the way that Odran had learned to recognize as a Falosian accessing her empathic skills. "Zera is deeply concerned. She hides it better than you do, but her psychic signature is upset." Dinara focused on Odran again. "I've never seen Zera ruffled. What happened?" "I had an accident while training, that's all. It happens and it's not a big deal." "Then why isn't Zera here telling you off for an error and supervising your medical care?" He sighed. "Because I wouldn't let her." "I see. She thinks I am an idiot." "Did you give her reason to?" He bristled for a moment before he nodded, letting the anger go and leaving only the stinging embarrassment. "I made a stupid mistake. She stopped my training." "What did you do?" He grimaced. "I'm so goddess damn tired of being sick. I'm Verit, a warrior and a healer. I'm tired of everyone asking if I'm all right. I'm tired of not being able to do the things I should. I'm Verit. And Verit males don't get sick, don't have long recovery periods." He shook his head, frustration welling up. It was bad enough that some clan members looked down on him for being a healer rather than a warrior, but to be weak as well, unacceptable. "You just die." He looked at her in shock. "It's a fact, Odran. Verit males either recover quickly or die on the battlefield. You are genetically engineered to take a beating and keep going. You have very little psychological framework for this kind of prolonged recovery. You experienced a highly traumatic incident." He pressed his lips together. He knew this. He was a healer that predominantly treated females. It was why he spent so much time on research. There wasn't much call for medical healers on Verit for males. "So be a healer, Odran. Heal thyself. What would you tell a patient if they presented like you are now?" Dinara continued gently. "You know what you would say. Perhaps extend yourself the same grace and kindness." She patted him on the arm. "Think about it. I'll do up a new physical therapy plan for you." He shook his head in immediate denial. "I want to continue with Delma Layat." He wanted to continue with Zera. The strong, smart female fascinated him. He had become addicted to her biting, sarcastic wit and frightening competence. Dinara raised an eyebrow. "I thought you said that she declined to train you. Zera isn't in the habit of saying things she doesn't mean." Odran's lips thinned. He refused to accept defeat. "I'll convince her." Be careful how much you push, Odran. She doesn't owe you anything. He grinned at Dinara cockily. She likes me. She calls me charming. Dinara looked at him for a long moment. Charming only gets you so far, my friend. You aren't the only one with scars. Everyone is dealing with their own shit. Be careful where you go tramping with those enormous feet of yours. Later that night, Zera lay on her bed and flicked desultorily through the channels on the intergalactic entertainment net. It didn't matter what planet you were from. Storytelling was universal, and parents everywhere wanted to sit their spawn down to watch something to get a few minutes of peace. Every species had great deeds to tell, morals to impart, or humour, or whatever passed for humour, to lighten the hard times. She settled on a Galesian drama, set several hundred years ago. It was highly popular, chronicling the life of one of their queens. The Galesians did well out of interstellar entertainment. They were a beautiful species, tall and inherently graceful with gossamer wings, 4 arms, and narrow heart-shaped faces with overly large jewel-coloured eyes. They were also expert performers and mimics and could deliver incredible performances. The show was excellent, but she couldn't seem to focus. She was furious and deeply disappointed in Odran. She wasn't really sure why she had only been training him for a week. Sure, they had a connection and some great banter, but they didn't actually know each other. They had made no promises, implied or otherwise. But you wanted to, her heart whispered. Okay, so she liked him. Liked his charm, his intelligence, his sassiness, his inherent kindness. He was a gorgeous male, painted in gold and silver. She wasn't dead, and it had been a long dry spell between partners. He's also an arrogant asshole, her brain reasoned. Charming was right. He was clearly doted on by the maman, a favoured son in the clan, roguish and entirely too good-looking for his own good. He'd be a pain in her ass if they ever got together. There was also the darkness she occasionally sensed in him, a hard edge that she could never quite capture. It intrigued her. She gave up on the show. Turning off the display screen, she decided to turn in early. Between training Odran and her shifts, she had missed out on more than a few rest hours. Perhaps this moroseness was simply fatigue. Decided, she shucked out of her pants and turned off the main lighting, leaving on a dim nightlight. She lay down in just her oversized tee and punched the pillow a few times to get it into the right position. She had barely closed her eyes when a low buzzer sounded, and her HUD alerted her that Odran was outside her door. Determined to ignore him, she pulled the covers up and closed her eyes again firmly. The buzzer sounded again. After a long moment, her HUD sent her a gentle ping, alerting her to an incoming call from Odran. She groaned in irritation and blinked once to accept. Odran's face filled her vision. You know this qualifies as harassment on some planets. Please talk to me, Zera. No. Please. I have nothing to say. Just listen then. She groaned in aggravation. You have 1 minute. I'm listening. He paused. Can I come in? No. Talk or I go back to sleep. He took a deep breath. I wanted to apologize. You were right. I should have listened to you. My head isn't in the best space right now, and look, can I please come in or can you come out? I'd really rather do this face to face. Zera considered. On one hand, she was comfy in her cozy nest and really didn't want to get up. On the other hand, she had the feeling that he might stay out there all night if she said no. Ugh, fine. She got up and stomped over to the door, mashing the open pad. Odran limped in and she motioned for him to sit on the end of the bed. Sit. Talk. She plopped down at the top of the bed, leaned against her bedhead, and pulled the covers up over her bare legs. Odran's brain seized up. He had been rehearsing this speech for hours, but in his imagining of how this would go, he had never considered this. Zera was gorgeous, all sleep rumpled. Her hair was down in a curled tangle, and she wore a loose black tee. He had caught a brief flash of her muscled, naked legs, covered in more of those intricate tattoos as she climbed into bed. It all derailed his well-prepared apology. Come on then, Odran. Spit it out. I don't have all night. I'm tired and need some sleep. What did you want to say that was so urgent it couldn't wait? He gathered his wayward thoughts and tried again. I wanted to say that I'm sorry. Truly. I don't know what was going on in my head. There was a long pause before his words dried up, his speech forgotten, and he finished lamely. So yeah, I'm sorry. Eventually Zera realized that nothing more was forthcoming. Okay, thanks for that. Are we done? Don't be like that. I'm trying to apologize. Can't you give me a break? "Oh, I'm so sorry, my lord. Shall I sit quietly and flutter my eyes at you when you talk?" He grit his teeth. Why did he think this was a good idea? Talking to her was an exercise in frustration. "I'm trying to do the right thing here. Adults apologize when they fuck up. Do you have to be such a bitch about it?" She narrowed her eyes, anger steaming off her. "You haven't seen me be a bitch yet, charming. You come here, demand to be let in, give me a half-assed apology that doesn't actually say anything, then get pissed at me and defensive when I'm not bowled over by your glory." He raised his arms placatingly. "Look, this isn't how I wanted it to go. I'll bet it's not. Will you just shut up for a fucking minute and let me speak? Why do you always have to have the last word?" Her fury detonated. She knelt up, pointing at him. "Let's get one thing clear, Odran. I don't owe you anything. Not my time and not my attention. I was doing you a favor and you acted like a dick. You ignored me, my expertise and my advice. You spoke to me with disrespect and acted in a self-destructive manner. I won't be a party to that kind of bullshit. You want to hurt yourself, do it on your own time." He opened his mouth to speak. "I'm not finished. Then you come here with this attitude and these demands. This apology isn't because you feel bad, it's because you feel you should apologize or you want something. More training, some sort of absolution or something. Whatever it is, I'm not the person you need to work this shit out. I'm not good at feelings and I'm not your maman or your therapist." "There isn't anyone else," he roared, and she opened her mouth in shock. "There isn't anyone else that I can talk to this about. Goddess knows I've tried." He scrubbed his hands over his face, tugging at his hair to relieve some of the strain. "They just don't get it. Verit don't get sick, aren't weak. They can't understand what I'm going through." Zera swallowed, unsure how to navigate the well of pain that she had pierced. "And you think I can?" she asked quietly. "Just because I'm Falosian, it doesn't mean that I'm good with people or feelings." He shook his head in denial, sighing heavily. "Because I feel you get me. You see me in a way that others don't." She barked a harsh laugh. "I've never been good at talking. At least if you hadn't injured yourself, I could have helped you spar to work out some of this frustration." He looked at her, captured by the yellow of her eyes in the dim light, reflecting in the darkness. His voice was husky. "That's not the only way to work out frustration." Her pupils dilated, and he saw her breath catch when she caught his meaning. He moved so slowly, leaning forward to grip the back of her neck and pull her towards him. His lips were a hair's breadth away from hers when she whispered, "This is a terrible idea. Monumentally bad." "I think it's a great idea," he countered, their breaths mingling. "Don't say no, my lady." She froze for a split second before making her decision, staring into his eyes, weighing his need, his sincerity. She surged into his arms, and their kiss was an angry clash of teeth and tongues as they devoured each other. He used his hand to maneuver her head for the perfect fit, and he drank her in. It was explosive and unexpected. The wave of his sensuality and need barreled through all her defenses. His tongue delved into her mouth, tasting her, and he groaned as the scent of her arousal reached him. She climbed over to straddle him, fitting herself to him with just his pants between them, her legs wrapped around him, a delicious friction that stole her breath. Odran set his teeth into the column of her throat and licked the salt of her skin lazily. "Bad kitty," she murmured, the sultry complaint nothing like the censure it should have been. He dragged his fingers up her muscular legs, tracing her tattoos. His hands moulded that luscious ass that he had so desperately wanted to touch every day during training. He moaned into their kiss, and she tugged at his hair to pull his head back, allowing her to trail kisses down his jaw. "This changes nothing," she snarled. "You're still an ass." "As you wish, my lady. This is just another form of physical therapy. Tell anyone about this and I'll kick you into next week." He grinned ferally at her, and she felt her heart flip in response. Goddess, she was so sunk. He tossed her onto the bed and went for the fastening of his pants when she stopped him. "Slower, show me." He looked at her, and his breath caught for a second. Zera lay on the bed, wanton in the dim light. He knew his eyes would be changing colour, navy flooding them to accentuate his night vision. He didn't want to miss a single second of this. She was glorious in the dim light, her crystalline tattoos shimmering with fire. He undid the snaps of his pants and dropped them to the floor, pooling around his feet. He prowled up the bed towards her, a giant jungle cat. He used his tongue, licking in tiny sips. He grinned at her in the dark, laughing. "Scream for me, my lady." He delved in with teeth and tongue, torturing her. They twined with each other, playing and exploring. After an hour or more, they lay together, breathing heavily. She laughed in delight. "Well, this was unexpected." He smiled darkly. "What makes you think I'm finished, lady?" She felt a whole body shiver at the dark dominance in his voice, so unexpected from the sassy, funny male she knew. Goddess knew she hated bossy males, so why the hell did she find this so damned hot? Somehow tonight, the healer had tuned into a dark fantasy she hadn't known she had. She wanted his darkness. All night he took his time, learning her secret places, and it was hours more before he deemed himself satisfied. He wrapped a big hand around her throat loosely, not enough to make her feel trapped, just enough to send her arousal soaring again at the implied dominance. She bared her teeth and wrapped her own hand around his braids, tugging his head back when he went to kiss her again lazily, holding him away. They locked eyes for an instant in a battle of wills before she flipped him, tangling her legs with him and ending up on top. She had a split second to enjoy her triumph, to smile smugly before he turned the tables on her, flipping her around in a move that she had most definitely not taught him, leaving her face down on the bed with him lying on top of her back, his hips pressing hers into the mattress as he spoke into her ear. "Whatever will you do now, my lady? It seems I have you at my mercy." He bent down to set his teeth in her neck again, holding her in place while his claws whispered up her sides to the settle on her waist. "Or perhaps I have you at my mercy. Are you going to do something about it, healer? Or are you too weak?" He snarled at her barb, fire reigniting as his eyes glazed with rising lust. He leaned forward to whisper in her ear again, "Yes, lady." She looked at him over her shoulder. "Yes, now." He twined his fingers in her mane of hair. "Say please." She laughed outright, delighting him, and wiggled her butt, driving him to the edge. "Please, healer." "As you wish, my lady." Once more they played, before they finally collapsed, exhausted. He fell to the left, cradling her in his arms, breathing heavily, their hearts racing against each other. They stayed that way until their sweat cooled on their skin. Occasionally he dropped tiny kisses on the side of her cheek and neck, and she felt her heart crack open dangerously. Angry, rough coupling was one thing, but this tenderness threatened to undo her. This was caring, and she could become perilously addicted. Eventually he spoke into the quiet between them. "Well, this was not how I saw tonight going." She gave a hushed laugh. "Will you be adding this to your list of prescribed therapies, healer?" "Perhaps, although I'm not sure if many of the males here are my type. They might find my performance lacking enthusiasm." She smiled and winced slightly as they moved apart. "I wouldn't say that you were lacking in enthusiasm." He looked at her with concern. "Did I harm you?" She shook her head, a little sore, but it will be a pleasant reminder tomorrow. She rolled over to look at him, nestling her head in the crook of his arm. "Did I hurt you?" she asked. "You were the injured one." He snorted with laughter. "I'm not so injured that I cannot partake in this pleasure." They lay in silence until Zera spoke. "This is a little weird, isn't it?" He nodded, stroking her tangled hair back from her forehead. "Do you want me to go?" Zera shrugged. The pause drew out, the tension growing thick between them. Zera thought it was strange to be so close to someone you felt like you were inside their skin, only to lie next to them minutes later and have them feel so far away. Odran considered. "It might be best if I went. We can talk about this, whatever this is, tomorrow." Zera smiled crookedly. "Are you sure you'll want to talk about this tomorrow?" Her question betrayed her anxiety. He seemed taken aback. "Why would I not? This isn't exactly how I planned our first night to go, but now that it has happened, you are glorious, my goddess. I am honored that you elected to spend your time with me." Zera searched his eyes for another long moment. "All right. Perhaps it's best if you go. If you still feel the same tomorrow, we can do breakfast." "Do you wish to be seen with me?" "You were the one threatening me. Should I tell anyone?" Sensing his hurt, she reached out to smooth his frown with a fingertip. "It's not that I don't wish to be seen with you. There's just a lot of pressure here. Everyone will be watching. It might be nice to work out what we feel for each other before everyone else gets involved." "All right, if that is your wish. I must be honest, Zera. I did not intend for this to happen. I do not regret it, not for a second. But there are things we must discuss before we go any further." "Oh, goddess, if you tell me you are already mated." He laughed and cut her off, placing his hand over her mouth. I am not already mated. He kissed her soundly. There are things we must discuss, but they can wait until tomorrow. I will leave you to your rest. We can share breakfast in the morning and discuss our next steps. He stood and pulled on his clothing, hiding a wince at the pain in his leg and side. He would never let her see that their exertions had caused him any discomfort. I will keep quiet for a while, Zera, but I have no desire to hide our liaison. She knelt on the bed and took him in her arms. I wouldn't want to either, just for a little, until we know how we feel and if we want to go public. Thanks for listening. Check back soon for the next part.